This country has a storied history when it comes to immigration, and it's worth revisiting it because I think most people don't really fully understand the precedents that are part of what laid the tracks for where we are now.
We began as 13 states along the Atlantic seaboard. We pushed across the Alleghenies, the Ohio River, the Mississippi, the last far range of the distant Rockies. We carried freedom with us. No aristocratic classes here, no kings, no nobles or princes, no state church, no courts, no parasites, no divine right of man to rule man.
No parasites. I'm not sure what this old-timey guy was talking about with parasites. It might have been parasites from above, actually, mostly. The aristocrats, the feudal lords sort of living off the work of others while not being particularly productive. That is the pre-capitalist era. Over the course of American history, we have experienced several different waves of immigration and immigration policy. So one of the first instances of confronting the issue was the Naturalization Act of 1790. And this basically established right from the beginning that as a matter of American precedent and law, we can discriminate on who comes in on the basis of whatever criteria we feel will preserve our culture and our laws. It restricted naturalization to free white persons of good character who had resided in the U.S. for 2 years. One of the things that's interesting about American history is that coming to the country, immigrating, technically wasn't really being controlled until much, much later. The original naturalization laws and policies were simply about who could actually be a full citizen. But you could just come on over if you survived the boat trip. A big milestone, of course, was the 14th Amendment, which enshrined the idea of birthright citizenship, which is moving its way through the courts right now. And President Trump is trying to overturn birthright citizenship or narrow the interpretation of the 14th Amendment to only apply to the slaves, which is what it was actually mostly intended for. It was mostly intended to deal with the fact that we now had people who need to be given full citizenship as should their kids, freed Black Americans. And it's important to understand the phases that come next. So I want to go back to our graphic. So one of the things that starts the first wave of restrictions on immigration is the arrival of my great-grandparents. Literally, in the late 1800s, heading into 1920s, there was a first massive wave of immigration. It really peaked in 1910 in absolute terms and as a share of the population. This was the wave of Germans, then Irish, then Italians and others. And a series of laws were passed along the way in reaction to this, because as it turns out, there is something like a natural social reaction to too many foreigners coming into your community. There is a threshold that triggers a response. I'm not even saying whether that's good or bad. It's just a fact. And so the first couple laws to restrict immigration. First was the Page Act and the Chinese Exclusion Act, and these were often quite explicitly racial. But really the big shift, the big contraction, was the Johnson-Reed Act of 1924. And this not only was a response to my great-grandparents coming over, but it was also rigged in a certain way because it established the nation of origin's quota system. And that system set the start point at 1890 before my grandparents showed up and basically said the composition of America as in terms of shares of ethnicities and countries of origins, it was about right in 1890, and moving forward, we should only accept people from those countries in those proportions. And so when you look at the graph, what you see, first of all, is a total collapse in immigration, and then a very slow growth from there until you get to 1965. Now, as I said, those early 1900s was where my great-grandparents, like Gino Alberto Popola, arrived in 1910 at the peak. On my mother's side, Enrico Harry Fadulo, my great-great-grandfather on my mom's side, arrived in 1899. I was the Mexican of the 1920s, 1910s. And as you'll see later, that is very much how the culture treated us. Fast forward to the 1960s, and everything changes. And one of the things that happens in the 1960s is the birth of a phrase, a nation of immigrants. It's actually John F. Kennedy that originally crafted this phrase basically as a way to soften the public towards immigration reform. And I imagine it was partly because his family was Irish. And so he had a sense of, heritage and pride and a belief that it was not right that the 1924 restrictions essentially made it hard for people like him to come to America. But what came next was the biggest change we've had in immigration since 1924, and there hasn't been anything like it since. And that is the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1965. And many of the people that have come into this country since, under the 1965 Act, have made this country better and are beautiful, wonderful people. And I don't want any of the things I'm talking about to ever seem like I'm not in favor of great people coming to this country. In fact, I have great people like that in my own family. But there were promises made at the time of this from good old, especially Teddy Kennedy. An older Teddy Kennedy sort of lays out his ideas for what motivated him.
What are the values that Americans care very much about? They care about people that work very hard. They care about people that care about their families. They care about people that have a faith and an understanding of their faith. And they care very much about people that want to contribute and make America great.
Make America great. It's just funny to hear Teddy Kennedy say that.
It so happens that those values are so often the values of the immigrants that were coming here. What they did, what you had on the other side of the coin, is this enormous magnet of the American economy, drawing those individuals here. And those people came because they were prepared to sacrifice for their families, prepared to sacrifice.
I was going to make a Chappaquiddick joke, but I'll leave it at that with the reference to it. Teddy Kennedy is a morally compromised character, to say the least. But what he's saying there is actually fundamentally true. By and large, immigrants to this country share those fundamental values, or at least have historically, and broadly do, I think, even to this day. The problem with this act, first, is what it promised. And what it promised, what Teddy Kennedy himself told the voting public, is that the 1965 immigration bill would not fundamentally transform the demographics of America. That was told to the public. That was the pretense under which this bill was sold to the public. So what exactly happened since then? Well, so here we are. I again asked Gemini to kind of concoct a graphic from the underlying data. And here we are. This is the demographics of 1900. And again, white is a very broad category that includes a lot of people that have been trying to kill each other forever for a very long time, including people that aren't that different, like the Catholic Irish and the Protestant British. But I digress. We were 87.9% white in 1900. Fast forward to 1924. No real change. In fact, a slight bump. And part of the reason for that bump is that actually Latinos were often clumped in as being white. It was really just black or white back then, literally and figuratively. Let's jump ahead a little more to 1950. Virtually no change. So again, we are under the regime of the 1924 restrictions. Now, 1965, 15 years later, the act is passed. Now we see the beginning of the change. 1975, just 10 years later, the number has come down quite a bit. 1995, of course, we get some of this other stuff going on. The concept of Hispanic is invented because Hispanic is this crazy thing that includes people from Spain, but also South America, it's a concoction. I think Latino is more appropriate. But nonetheless, whites are now 73%. Now let's jump ahead to 2005. Now, whites are down to 66. Again, our friends to the south, African Americans are basically standing in place as a population, and the reason for that is almost entirely abortion. Margaret Sanger's disgusting evil eugenics plan to try to wipe out Black America with abortion was succeeding fairly spectacularly in keeping their population running in place. Just the facts. These are historical facts. Hispanic continues to grow. We get more Asians, and jump ahead another 10 years to 2015. White is down to 61%, Hispanic 17%. And as of today, we are now below 60%. We the whites. Hispanic is nearly 20%. And more than half of that group voted for Donald Trump, let's not forget. If the promise was the demographics of America were not going to fundamentally change from 1965 Act, that like the promises about the costs of Medicaid and Medicare, or the promises about Social Security being an actual account that you have as opposed to just a transfer scheme right from the start, was a lie, because this is what happened very, very quickly and is still going on. Now, the other thing that happened in 1965 was the passage of the Great Society and the creation of welfare. Welfare, Medicaid, Medicare, that all came in 1965. And I think it's important to understand that that represents a fundamental structural shift in the incentives around immigration, as we've seen among the Somali population, 75 to 80% of whom make use of these programs 10 years into being here. I think Milton Friedman put this pretty well.
The United States, as you know, before 1914 had completely free immigration. Anybody could get on a boat and come to these shores, and if he landed on Ellis Island, he was an immigrant. Was that a good thing or a bad thing? You will find hardly a soul who will say it was a bad thing. Almost everybody will say it was a good thing. But then I suppose I say to the same people, but now what about today? Do you think we should have free immigration? Oh no, they'll say, we couldn't possibly have free immigration today.
And this is being recorded in, I think, 1980s or so. So this is not long after the Immigration Act's passage and the passage of welfare.
Why is it that free immigration was a good thing before 1914 and free immigration is a bad thing today? Well, there's a sense in which that answer is right. There's a sense in which free immigration, in the same sense as we had it before 1914, is not possible today. Why not? Because it is one thing to have free immigration to jobs. It is another thing to have free immigration to welfare. And you cannot have both.
Welfare or open immigration, take your pick. Now, this makes a lot of sense. And I think it's one of the reasons why Senator Rand Paul has recently announced legislation to try to deal with this.
You know, we ought to change the rules and not have refugees get welfare at all. And so I have a bill that would say refugees don't get it. And people say, well, gosh, these poor people come from war-torn areas. How will they survive? Well, they will survive the way we traditionally did, is when we admitted people, if you sponsored them, they're your responsibility. So you have many of these charities involved with bringing people here, and then the church charity thinks that charity involves signing them up for welfare. No, charity involves if your charity brings them here and they aren't working enough to have food, you feed them. It's charitable to give your own money. It's not charitable to take someone else's money.
Taxpayer subsidies and transfer schemes are not charity. They're not. You can't be moral at the point of a gun. That is my very libertarian angle on that. Charity, and frankly, as a Catholic, the Catholic position, the position of the church, has always been far more pro-immigrant than most Americans on average, actually. And I broadly share that. I broadly believe, both through my own experience and as a matter of looking at the history, that most immigrants to this country, we are blessed by the people who come here for the most part. The problem we have, more than anything else, are the systems that encourage bad behavior and bad actors. So I want to just show you two different ways to look at this, because it is actually rarely talked about with this detail. My friends over at the Cato Institute, particularly Alex Naresta, has assembled, to the best I think of his ability, and I think fairly impartially, what it looks like for individuals in terms of consumption of welfare benefits. And what he has found is that all immigrants consume 21% less welfare benefits than native-born Americans, people born in this country. And actually, non-citizens, including people who are here illegally, many, perhaps even most of whom came here legally initially and then overstayed their visa, consume even less. And you might be asking, well, how could that be possible? In Popola, you were just talking about all those Somalis that are like using welfare like crazy. Well, the Somalis and their culture of corruption are a particularly narrow and extreme case. But the fact of the matter is that the guys you see waiting outside of Home Depot have no interest in getting sent back to Mexico. And so in general, they try not to take any government handouts because it sets them up to be in the system. I know this for a fact. I know this for a fact as I sit here now since 2011, a Texan, a border state guy. That's a big part of what's going on now. There is a different way to look at this, and this is from another data set which looks at households instead of individuals. And the households, and I think this is important and this is meaningful, tell a different story. That 1965 bill created what's called chain migration. That working age male comes along and then brings with him his infirmed grandmother and mother and his wife who's got a bunch of kids and all the kids. And so the argument goes, and I think this is a completely reasonable argument, is that sure, that working guy or gal, but it's mostly guy, he's not taking welfare benefits, but he's brought his whole family. And so we've got to look at the household. And when you analyze this data on the basis of households, well, then immigrants use more than native-born Americans, and non-citizens use even more still, 59% more for non-citizens, 54% more for all immigrants, which includes non-citizens. So basically the differences there are small. So those are two ways to look at this information. For my friends at Cato, and for, in a sense, my former self, although again, I'm still quite pro-immigration in general, I think you have to ask yourself, is this really compelling? For non-citizens to consume 54% less of our taxpayer benefits than actual citizens. That's still quite a bit more than zero, which means you're still having very large numbers of people come to this country and go on the dole. And when you look at all immigrants, including legal, to come here legally and go on the dole and take from other citizens who have contributed to the tax base of the society is outrageous. That is not a particularly good argument. You shouldn't get a nickel if you come here, whether you're a refugee or not, whether you're legal or not. If you're gonna come into our game, you don't get to immediately reach into the pot and grab a bunch of chips out of the center of the table. That is just a scam. It's completely unfair. And frankly, I think it's a moral travesty that turns people against good, healthy, enriching immigration. People that are going to come here and frankly, in a lot of cases, be better than our own kids graduating from Columbia with all of their cockamamie communism. Frankly, we are producing worse people in our own kids coming out of universities on average as a matter of ideology than most immigrants. This is all the dollars and cents. And I absolutely think nobody should get anything. If you are coming here, you should be like, it's 1800 for you. Welfare hasn't been invented. You gotta live or die on the basis of whether you can produce and create and earn, or whether some wonderful charitable person or church or organization can help you get on your feet because you are the victim of some horrible war and atrocity or whatever. I'm not against charity. Charity's great. Charity should replace the state. But when it comes to the cultural factors, they are also a little more complicated. So here's just a couple and then I'll start to wrap things up. Are we importing a bunch of radical commies? Well, I think if we're importing from largely Islamic countries, that is a different story. Places like Somalia that are 99% Islamic and often radical and have been in essentially religious warfare for decades on end, I don't know why we want any of those people. It's not crystal clear to me why Islamic immigration should be allowed at all. On the basis of what that creed, which is both a religion and a political doctrine, says. But I'm going to get to a little bit of that in a second. But in general, how do immigrants think? What are they like? Well, there's a bunch of stuff that's actually pretty interesting. Number one, this is from various polling data. First-generation immigrants actually think more highly of our country than we, the people who have been born here. They have a higher, although it's still quite low, so they're still reasonable. They have a higher sense of confidence in the Congress and the presidency than native-born citizens. Now, maybe that's actually not good, but I think the reasons for that is because they're happy to be here, and this place is a lot better than where they came from, which is why they came in the first place. Secondly, they have comparable levels of pride to Americans born here. However, they feel a lot less shame than native-born Americans who feel quite a bit of shame about our society, which I find to be ridiculous. We're one of the greatest societies and the most benevolent societies this planet has ever seen. Even as far as empires go, we're pretty darn good. We're maybe not even as benevolent as the British, but I'd say we're pretty close. We're a lot better than the other empires that came before. Even so, people that choose to come here are pretty happy they're here and generally don't complain as much as our kids graduating from Harvard and Columbia. Finally, the demographics is destiny replacement types who are very real and have been saying that stuff out loud for decades on the blue team. They got their asses handed to them in 2024 because a majority of Latinos voted for Donald Trump and a near majority of Asians, which is the two categories that exploded after 1965, shifted votes. In general, we still assimilate people pretty well. And actually, those conservative Catholic Mexicans that come here working like animals and having lots of kids are more conservative than your daughter, most likely. So I think that's worth taking seriously when you're thinking about immigration into the United States. Again, I am like a softie. I'm like a dove with a machine gun. I love these people, most of them, but the ones that shouldn't be here need to get the hell out. Finally, even though this is true, it's not clear to me why anyone that comes here for the first time, having been born elsewhere, should vote or be able to occupy any public office. That is like coming to a game that's already in progress and trying to change the rules. It's like that jerk that shows up on at a pickup basketball game and suddenly wants to change things around. I'm sorry. If you've arrived here because you wanted to come, you should just have to play by whatever the rules are now, as broken as they are, and be happy you're here. I want to hear in the comments what you think of this. But in general, even if it would benefit politicians that I prefer, I don't think first-generation people should be allowed to vote or run for office. If that were the case, we wouldn't have Zoran Mamdani. And in fact, if we actually just upheld the laws of this country currently, which don't allow communists or people with a totalitarian ideology, it's not clear how his father would have been admitted into the country at all for being a radical communist. Instead, of course, he's a professor at Columbia University. Those are some of the ways I think we can actually set up the system to welcome more people. No welfare benefits, no voting, take a green card, get a job, build a life. That's what all of us did whose ancestors got here before 1924. And it worked. And it was harder then to do all that stuff than it is today. If those were the rules, the filtration system would kick in pretty well, and we would have an even better cohort of immigrants from all over the world coming to this country. If you want to see people who are proud of this country and horrified by left-wing politics, just talk to anyone from Vietnam or Cambodia or Venezuela or Cuba. These people have fled the thing that our Ivy League graduates are trying to recreate. But with that, I will just wrap us up with a little ode to what the American spirit, I think, still fundamentally should be.
First of all, we're a working people. On the land, at the workbench, at a desk. And we're an inventive people. The lightning rod, cotton gin, the telegraph, the blessed anesthesia of ether, the rotary printing press, the telephone, electric welding, the incandescent lamp, the submarine, steam turbine, the motor-driven airplane, the X-ray tube, the gyroscope compass, the sewing machine, television. All these.
The internet, the automobile, nuclear power, nuclear bombs. Just about everything, just about everything.
And countless more bear witness to our inventiveness. We hunt, and we fish. Up north, down south, back east, out west. When the season opens, we hunt and fish. And we're a sports-loving people. And we're probably the travelingest nation in all history. We love to go places.
We don't usually love to go abroad, but our country's big enough that we mostly don't have to.
We have the cars, we have the roads, we have the scenery. We don't need passports, but sometimes we need alibis.
But sometimes we need alibis. What's this mid-Atlantic man talking about? What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, buddy?
And we're a great joining people. We join clubs, fraternities, unions, federations. Shove a blanket us, we'll sign up.
That was one of the most important things about American culture, the creation of a civic society, a civic life. Alexis de Tocqueville talked about this when he arrived here and he wrote his book, Democracy in America. This is one of the other things, like the perversion of immigration, that our welfare state has crowded out. The coming together voluntarily to help our fellow man in mutual aid. And the inevitable collapse of these systems is coming. And when it does, I think if the American spirit can survive, we can return to the best of our angels.
Churches, we have every denomination on earth. 60 million of us regularly attend. And no one dares tell us which one to go to. We elect our own neighbors to govern us. We believe in individual enterprise and opportunity for men and women alike. We make mistakes.
Big time.
We see the results. We correct the mistakes. We skyrocket into false prosperities and then plummet down into false, needless depressions. But in spite of everything, we never lose our faith in the future. We believe in the future. We build for the future.
That's roughly the kind of people we are. Boastful, easygoing, sentimental, but underneath passionately dedicated to the ideal our forefathers passed on to us, the liberty and dignity of man.
That was from Why We Fight. Some lovely propaganda to try to save the world.
If you like this clip, you should check out the full video and all the other great content we've got at Dad Saves America. So be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and ring that bell so you won't miss our new stuff as it drops each week.